All right, here we are. It is time for Illustration Masterclass on this Friday. I hope that all of you out there who are watching on Behance or YouTube or wherever you happen to be are having a great day and are ready to talk about one of the great illustrators of our entire illustration history, and that is Mark English. So today, this will be the first in a series of shows that I'm going to do where we're going to look at the work of an influential and amazing artist, and we're going to really break down what makes their work interesting and special and unique and great. And then we'll do a little bit of drawing, and we're going to apply some of the things we learned and some of the ideas that we take away from studying the work of these artists. I think this will be really fun. So, reminder that if you are watching this over on YouTube, I'm not following the chat so much over there. If you're watching it elsewhere other than Behance, I'm not following it over there either. But I will say that if you're watching on Behance, I can answer any questions you have right here, right now. That's the beauty of a live stream. So to those of you who are watching on Behance, I say hello. I say hi to Rob and Cryo and RB and Kathleen and Umacorn and Cody and Afroha and who did I miss there? Sorry if I missed anybody. Thank you for joining me, everybody, and hope you're ready to have a little fun with the show. All right, so we're going to kick it off with a little jump into Photoshop, and I've got some lovely illustrations to share with you from our good friend Mark English. And these are really gonna knock your socks off. Okay, so let's start with this fine piece here. Now, the reason I start with this one is it's kind of a good example of a lot of the things that Mr. English was known for. Although, frankly, the great thing about him as well is that there was so much work that he put out. He was so prolific that stylistically, there were a lot of different avenues that he pursued, a lot of different things he tried out, but there was always sort of a signature vibe to his work, and it really stood out for a number of reasons. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to break down some of these illustrations, and what you'll see at the end of it is that we'll have a nice list of things that we have covered and paid attention to that we can then use to inspire us in our own work, and also that we can appreciate as just really great technical things that Mr. English was doing with his work, and that made it stand out and made it be so influential on so many other artists throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Okay. So let's start with this one. We're going to just zoom in a little bit here and take a look. Now, one of the things I want to point out right out of the gate is that Mark English was, like most of the artists of his generation, clearly very well trained in anatomy and in the fundamentals of drawing from life. And it was because of this training, because of this knowledge that he had, like so many other artists at the time, that he was able to bend reality in a convincing and a pleasing way. And we're going to talk about design in a moment, but just talking about the fundamentals of drawing and understanding how things are put together, human anatomy, and perspective, and all these kinds of things. You will remember that in last week's masterclass, and if you missed that, you can go back and watch it on Behance or YouTube, I talked about stylization. And what we did was we took a look at a photograph of a cat, and then we looked at 5 or 6 representations of cats that were from cartoons that are well known, or comics. And we explored some ideas about how it's easier to abstract from reality than it is to just simply start from nothing or have no knowledge whatsoever of the subject that you want to stylize. And we went with the example of a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, starting with an illustration that was more realistic of the head of a turtle, and then sort of stretching it and simplifying it and changing it, but working from that starting point of reality and then departing in a logical way from there to eventually arrive at the Ninja Turtle. And so what I want to talk about here with Mark English is you're going to see examples of where he chooses to play around a little bit more with form and with texture and with rendering and so on, knowing what to leave in, what to take out, what you can sort of pull and stretch. This all comes from a great knowledge of the fundamentals, okay? And so starting with this one, I want to first look at the first theme I want to cover with his work, and that is a very rich surface. What I mean by this is that if I were to zoom out, all of Mark English's works are going to be completely successful and legible from a distance. Okay, he understands how to use contrast effectively. He understands how to use shape effectively. Everything is legible. But when I talk about a rich surface, what I mean is that upon closer inspection, you can get in close on any area of a Mark English painting, and you're going to be able to see lots of rewarding details, okay? Visible brushwork, pattern, okay? And you'll see this sort of dotted or circular pattern theme, this motif, resurface multiple times in his work. It's sort of a signature thing, and it's just lovely. But I'm rewarded here with this tree upon closer inspection by seeing some really nice textural brushwork in there, some line work, and this gorgeous pattern here created by the branches as we move into the representation of the foliage, which, as you can see, also becomes a shape that blends seamlessly with the hair, okay? And that's another thing we'll talk about, which is this blending of shapes and blending of objects within a painting, overlapping, sometimes intersecting in a way that is compositionally interesting, or maybe even thematically necessary. All right, so even if we just come into this little area here, all right, now when we talk about anatomy, there's such a great simplification here, okay, of the ocular cavity. Remember where the eye is there. So the eyeball, the lid, okay, the ocular cavity there, and the brow ridge, all these wonderful parts simplified down to a simple shape. Okay, and if I just isolate that shape for you, okay, all predominantly with one color and value, right? This right here is the shape, and we can just move that over there, and then give it a little color there. All right, so that kind of ability to be able to take a fairly complex area of the body and reduce the range of values on both sides, on the high side, on the low sides, the darks and the lights, kind of meet in the middle, and then simplify that down to a soft edge shape like this, and it reads totally clearly. That kind of trick is only something you can accomplish when you really know what you're doing. You've drawn a lot of faces, you painted a lot of heads, and you know how to do that. And you'll see other examples of that kind of simplification. Like this is a really great, you know, representation here of the shadows that are going to appear based on the form, three-dimensional form of the ear, right? And that shape is just really nice working in there as well. There's no reason to draw that ear and really render it in such a way that you have a lot of detail. That wouldn't be interesting for what else is going on here. It'd be a little distracting. And so these kinds of decisions. So, and we talk about simplification, we talk about that fundamentals of drawing kind of thing. We're going to also talk about design. And if you look at this piece, okay, there's so much thinking going into balancing out the elements of the composition here. A lot of balancing acts going on. And shape is what I want to talk about. Okay, like coming in here and just creating these really repetitive, okay, series of curves, right, one after another, and then echoing that throughout, okay, in larger and smaller forms, throughout this entire area, okay? And then even down here, okay, at the bottom, this is a vignette, right? We have some rougher areas that still, though, are following that kind of shape idea, that motif of like these rounded kind of forms, right? If I just come on around this way, even though the edges are different, right? They're not as clean and crisp. We're still following that. That's really cool. All right, so I'm going to move on from here because it's just a starting point to give you sort of an introduction to the kinds of things we're going to talk about and study and notice in Mark's work. All right, so let's go on now to this one. And what I want you to see here is, even though, all right, we're dealing with a number of heads, okay, that are fairly realistically painted, so to speak, right? There is still the same understanding of the grouping of elements, right? If you come back to that first one, I want you to just notice there's a real appreciation for how to group disparate, okay, or unrelated items, right? These butterflies and the flowers and the tree and everything else. But knowing how to sort of position and scale and overlap, okay, and bump up against one another, all of these things, right? That really creates a fantastic floating composition, a vignette, okay? And here we're getting, even though we're working inside the boundaries of a rectangle or a square, all right, we are still within that space creating separate vignettes that are interesting shapes, okay? And within those vignettes, you've got all these different size relationships, okay, to make things feel balanced. And you've even got, look at this, you've got this woman's face here, framed by the top of this kid's head, this person's head here, and then we have hair blending nicely with the dark of that tree, but look how it comes around and then becomes a silhouette of a man's face right there. All right, so design, really amazing balance of shapes and everything else. And then again, playing with this idea of rendering versus flat. Okay, when I say rendering versus flat, what I mean is here we're really modeling the form. So we're really understanding the sculptural nature of, the three-dimensional nature of, okay, that face. The nose is rising away from the planes here on the cheeks. We're moving away. We have the bridge of the nose. This is a three-dimensional form that is protruding. And then there's the recession here under the brow, right? We see shadows, we see light. We're rendering with light, right? Still done in a subtle way, but it's there. Versus, okay, this big, flat, graphic representation of a tree, which has such a great balance of large, medium, and small shapes. Okay, so that's just a design exercise right there that's super satisfying. And then allowing those branches of the tree to also, if you will, check this out, they kind of take that background of the houses, okay, and they divide them up into a really pleasing sort of a pattern, if you will, not a repeating kind of a pattern, but a nice sort of batik kind of look. If you've ever seen batik, where you have these areas that are divided up by almost this sort of veiny kind of series of lines, right? Big, medium, and small, like the wings of a butterfly. And that's just really, really satisfying right there. But here, again, what you're going to see is the same kind of stuff we see in his work, which is this rendered versus flat, okay? Heavy on understanding composition and design and really breaking up the space in an interesting way. In both cases, with this illustration and the last, I think it's safe to say that we have a couple of focal points, not just maybe one. But, you know, normally with an illustration like this, I would be afraid to move my focal point all the way out to the edge. But because this is a recognizable thing, a silhouette of a person's head, right? We're naturally going to go here, and it's going to just draw our attention Okay, no pun intended. But then it's nice to have the birds, the hummingbirds here, right, to kind of balance that. And then, like I said, from a distance, you're always going to read these really clearly, but on closer inspection, you're going to get rewarded with all kinds of rich surface activity. The same would be shown here. Unfortunately, I don't have super high-res images, so it's difficult to see all the activity that you have. But with all the brushwork and all the nice detail in here and everything, you'd definitely be rewarded with some goodies there. So here what I want to talk about is a continuation of these design elements that are simple geometry. And in the first illustration we saw a pretty clear example of that, but there are a lot of portraits, a lot of busts and portraits that Mark English did where you see evidence of his appreciation for dividing up the space, okay, and using simple shapes to do it. All right, there's really nice balance of geometry here. And there are a couple things to admire and appreciate here. And I'm just going to call attention to them here for a moment. All right, so I'll just grab a different color and we'll make a layer for us to look at this. And I'll use a basic brush so we can make this really simple. All right, so I'm just going to outline here boundaries of the picture plane. And I want you to see this amazing division of thirds right here. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? It's so perfect, right? 1, 2, 3. All right, so the blue shoulder pads sort of right down there for this dress, right? The elongation of the neck, really, really cool. All right, how that's fitting in there. And how there's something to appreciate in each one of these thirds. It's just so well balanced. But what I want you to see there is that first, that this is definitely, right, perfectly designed and considered and not an accident. And you can see that this is one of those cases where, symmetry in the illustration is achieved, but also it is not perfectly symmetrical in its treatment of what's on the left and the right side of the piece. So while this and this may as well be mirror images, okay, the interesting thing about it, and you know this from composition if you go back and watch my composition stuff, is as we're moving across with a diagonal, you're going to get more and more variation, okay? So on this side versus on this side, here you're getting a cast shadow, okay, and you're going to get more contrast with this pattern, and this is going to get darker and won't have that division with the clouds right there. And then here we go to less detail in the hair because it blends with the background, and this darker sphere here. And so this half and this half of the top third are quite different from one another, okay? In fact, we even see a simplification along the edge of the face, where here we see individual hairs, right? And then here we just have a soft edge from the face straight into the hair. All right, so these are all interesting things to point out. So really, really, Mark English is great composition master for sure. The other reason I want to show you this one is because this is one of the great examples, and we're going to see more of these down the road, of really understanding how to vary your edges, okay, when you want to have soft edges and hard edges, and sometimes doing that in a way where people don't expect one or the other to be there. A great example of a soft edge I would not expect is right here, okay? When we go to the bottom of the nose, there's a shadow, and the value, okay, is about the same between this bluish shadow and this more sort of violet shadow, but all of that just kind of softens and blends right into, okay, this area of the face. There's a soft transition, like a gradient, from here all the way down through here and all the way through there, okay? So just allowing for these areas that normally would have a bit more contrast, allowing them to just sort of blend just like that. Really lovely. Notice too, and this is going to come up later, but there is low contrast, generally speaking, okay, in the upper half of the face, or even the upper 2/3 of the face. And you're going to see some examples where he really pushes that, really pushes it. And you have to kind of pay attention and notice the face. But because he knows that the face is such an interesting area for all of us, we're going to seek it out. He can push that contrast back, and it adds kind of an air of mystery. Really lovely. Look at this little bit of pink that just runs right through across the cheeks and the nose. No accident there. That's from knowing what happens with anatomy and then pushing that, okay? Pushing that a little bit, as well as giving us a great echo where we have this red down here, okay? And if it weren't for the area here, okay, pulling in a little bit of warmth, right? We'd have this be too strong, but we get to just echo it a little bit up here. It's just a really subtle thing, but beautifully done. Okay, note too with color harmony, right? The eyes and this color here, we're getting this everywhere, right? So even though there's a lot of experimentation with color, both saturated and desaturated, we're still making sure that everything has harmony, that things get echoed. Okay, it's really, really great. This time more subtle with the pattern, but there's that very distinct kind of circular motif that you find, and it shows up now and then, and it's really great. But, okay, now just the really basic stuff. Look, boom, boom. Okay, now if I were to take this shape and reverse it, okay, flip it vertically. You see what we do here? See how those work together? Okay, that is so cool. And then you get a narrower version of it here. This is amazing. And that really, if you want to be honest, I mean, this really kind of just carries right up into the face. The face has been intentionally sort of squished from the outside and simplified into more or less a sort of pill shape like that, okay, of equal size. I'll mention two, between the chin and the bottom, the closure of the dress there, and the top of the head. So symmetry everywhere you look, simple geometry everywhere you look. Really satisfying. Excellent picture. Excellent picture. All right, so we're going to move on to this now. And what you'll see here is a great example again of that rewarding surface detail, that rich surface. Okay, everywhere you look, really lovely details. Okay, you could just get lost in one little section. This whole thing right here. Okay. This whole area, clunk. You know, just as a painting by itself. Don't need anything else. Look how interesting that is. Beautiful. So, and then here again, we are really, you know, pushing this idea that you can center something, okay? Center something and have the appearance of a symmetrical composition, but then throw you off by having a little something here, this imbalanced area, right? Versus the simplicity of this. 1, 2, 3, all this concentration in dense foliage, maybe that's the wrong word, but dense plant activity versus the simplicity of this. And then of course our figure all the way over here on the right. Okay, so as symmetrical as it may appear, it really isn't. And it's kind of like the thing I did with the Mona Lisa way back when, where I show you how there's symmetry but not in the background elements and in the pose, and it's just such a great device. Okay, now to have all this complexity here makes perfect sense, because we counterbalance. We go from our focal point here, which is full of interest, and then we travel diagonally across the way and we give us some interesting stuff here. Now to take this complexity and throw it all up here would not work. All right, we've got to simplify this down so that we come down here and we look at what's going on here, and then we can add that complexity up here because there's less of a reason for us to be concerned about competing with anything on this side of the canvas, okay? All these things taken into consideration. So a couple of the things we also mentioned, like edges. In this case, you're going to get a pretty clear, sharp edge of the figure, because as a silhouette, this really has to read and this is our focal point, right? This is our subject, rather. And so this has less of that going on, right? But still other motifs and other techniques that you see repeated in a lot of his other paintings. If you look at the later landscapes that Mark English did, you'll see a lot of pattern work. There's a lot of abstraction, a lot of just pure design, and less and less representation. Really fun to look at. All right, so here now we really can have a great example of edge variation, right? And maybe having it in places where you don't expect. And this idea of balancing detailed, finely rendered, intricate detail with wide open spaces. And that's such a great balancing act he's constantly having to do. And I just think it's so fun to look at. But look at the soft edges here. Look how this just fades, right into the saddle and into the background. The transition from here, the mane, into the background there is so soft, so subtle, right? It's like you're using your gradient tool in Photoshop, right? And then contrast that with the exaggerated contrast, okay, in the areas here for the muscles of the horse and the legs. All right, that's exaggerated for sure. That's being pushed well beyond what's observed, right? But it's super effective. And then we come over here, and again, just let that disappear softly into the background. Let this disappear softly, right? So we don't get pushed too far into the left side of the picture plane, right? This allows us to just move across that nose and continue around and not feel cramped over there on the left. Great solution to that. But yeah, hard edges, soft edges, masterfully employed, okay? And here's something else I wanted to talk about, which is coming back to this idea of shapes and silhouettes and vignettes. So in this piece, again, we are dealing with another set of boundaries, okay, within our picture plane. So we're painting out to the edges. It's not a vignette, and yet there is a vignette. If you were to isolate just, right, this shape of all the figures, right, it makes one shape, okay, full of interesting smaller and medium-sized shapes, right? And then right here, look what happens. What happens? It just softens up, right? So we have these hard edges with contrast, the purple against the yellow and the greens, right? But then here, we do not see, really, the left leg of this guy on our right, and the legs of this gentleman here. It all just becomes part of this shape down here, and it's full of brushwork, right? The surface is just so active here and so engaging. I mean, look at this area. Pure abstraction. Beautiful colors suggesting flowers, right? Floral stuff there, but just pure abstraction. He's having so much fun with this. And then where it matters, you come up and you do the faces. But just like I showed you with that initial one, right? Like that understanding of the form. Okay, look at this head. Now there's a close-up of this head that I got from David Apatoff's website. If you don't know David Apatoff, check out his blog. Fantastic writing about illustration. But let's take a look at that close-up here so you can really enjoy all the work that's happening there. As I said before, from a distance, totally reads clearly. We understand what's going on, but you get up close and you get a whole extra painting to enjoy, right? These close-up areas with all the brushwork, so much texture, so much beautiful stuff. Look at all the color in here, okay? Now, you know that trick with color where if you're just subtly changing the hues, or even pushing the hues to the opposite end of the color wheel, as long as you're getting your values correct, those colors are going to just feel like they're all kind of meshed together and they're talking to one another and just working as a team there, because that value is pretty consistent all the way through. But when you look at it up close, it's just really active, really vibrant, lots of fun. Okay, what a great face, you know, just simple shapes. Again, with the shadows, right? Just using those shadows to knock out the various facial features. The hair just blending right into that background. We don't even question that. Another great example of just leaving things out. Okay, pretty awesome. And then here too, we're looking at same kind of technique. That high contrast kind of shaped against a backdrop, right? Like that whole idea of, it's like foreground, middle ground, background, and you're really having the middle ground, the foreground, become such a engaging and interesting set of shapes, and they all kind of like gel together, right? And this idea of having darks on lights and lights on darks, and just you're constantly moving back and forth between one and the other. We go light, we go dark, we go light on dark, reverse it back and forth, connect the legs here to the table, right? Get these shapes to all kind of talk to each other and connect and be unified. And again, from a distance, I can understand it, but up close, so much fun to just get in there. I love this light, this ceiling lamp or whatever is just so fun. I love it. So many great little shapes in there. Big, medium, small, tons of variety, nothing too repetitive. And now the thing I want to talk about with this one is color experimentation and not being afraid to play with color. And this is a hallmark of illustrators in the 1960s and 70s and maybe back into the 50s a little bit, but just not even caring and experimenting and having fun with color. Notice though they use a lot of neutrals. They use a lot of neutrals and they use a lot of desaturated color, and then here and there give it a pop of saturation. And the reason that works so well is because those little pops here and there of the saturated color really sing when they are bumping up against all these desaturated areas. And you can really push it and try different colors, and it doesn't matter. You get your value structure pretty solid. The color can be a secondary player. Okay. Now this is brought up as a drawing, and what I want you to see here is I want you to appreciate and notice that even when he's drawing, right, there's so much variety in the mark making. Sometimes things are just colored in like a tone. Sometimes things are decorated. Look at the hair, the treatment of the hair, right? With these decorative or ornamental kind of line work, right? This isn't meant to be photorealism, right? But it does give us it still gives us information. It gives us the length of the hair, the direction the hair is moving, but it's really, really a beautiful sort of designed pattern representing hair, okay? And the same can be said for the facial hair, just moving it in the direction that it moves, but then going ahead and using these simple lines just to do that. A bit of tone underneath, right? A lot of variation in the marks. And then when you come up here, what do you see? Right? This is the same principle of having hard edges and soft edges and knowing where to use them. And just having the forehead and the border of the hat. We understand it's a hat, but it all just kind of blends into itself, right? You got a couple of little suggestions of where that border is between one and the other, that separation between the two. But in a lot of places, they're just one value and one color. They're the same thing, right? It doesn't have to be clear all the way across. We're going to fill in that gap. Our eyes are going to do that work. We don't need him to spell it out. Okay, what he can do instead is make this surface really extra chunky and full of texture and interest, and that's just so nice. And getting really dark in here brings the head forward, right? We go darker here, that makes it recede, and then this head pops forward off of that. And you got these nice random little marks like this that just make it feel like a human touched it, you know, made it. And that kind of stuff is so great because it's the only little pops of color we have. Everything else is almost gray, right? but it's because of all that desaturation that if you just warm this up a little, look at that ear. It looks pink. That nose looks pink. But I'm going to sample that color for you really quickly and take a look at the color wheel and look at where that color actually is. Did you expect that? Did you expect to see a almost 40%, not even 50% saturated, sort of orangish color when you looked at this? No, because remember, colors change depending on their neighbors. You've got sort of a greenish gray around this, and you warm that up just a little and push it a little bit towards red, it's going to read as more of a pink color. Okay, that's the magic of color, and Mark English knew that. But look at that drawing. Look at that. It's the same guy. There are hallmarks of his work and his style in there to appreciate. Different medium. Now this one I want to show just for pure, understanding of big amorphous shapes and how much you can do with those just by activating the surface with a bunch of chunky good brushwork. See that? So nice. So up close you just love it. You get to enjoy all that chunky brushwork, all that flat brushwork, right? Impasto, you can see the height of the paint there. You can see the height of the paint there, okay? And then where it counts, come in here, get really, really tidy, neat and tidy. Make sure you render everything out. But the rest of it, it's just kind of an exercise in abstraction. Pretty cool, right? And once again, what do we see? A lot of neutrals, okay? And then where the color pops, it's because we're just saturating it a bit more. Really lovely. Here, we're looking at an example of his work. I believe this was from the 1980s, where now it's really, really pushing into that design space, right? And no one's neck is this long, right? That's not a neck, but we don't care because it serves the design, right? This down to this, fantastic. Okay, so you go curved, S-curve, all the way down the back on the left side. What do you do on the right side? You come down further, right? And balance that out asymmetrically, okay? What do you do when you have all this interesting action for a silhouette, okay? You balance it out by having none right here. That's it. This whole area on the left is just one really beautiful, simple shape, okay? And once again, we're using the shadows to our advantage, not doing a ton of rendering. We're not even showing the eye, doesn't need to be there, all right? Pushing high contrast right here. It's like sculpting with clay, knowing where to push and pull and dig in. And now this is just, it's difficult to see, I know, so I'm going to pump up the contrast there for you because I want you to really see what that looks like. All right, so hang on a minute. Whoops. All right, I want you to look at this. So hopefully you can see all that lace work in there and how that is so designed, right? It would be more random than this if you were to see it as a photograph. But as a painting, it's this great opportunity to just really go to town with a beautiful little bit of pattern work there and play with that, okay? So this is just a masterpiece when it comes to design. Really, really successful. All kinds of balancing acts going on in here, right? And all kinds of oversimplification of shapes. Look at this collar. It's so flat. Remember what we talked about earlier? Flat versus rendered, right? To do that all in one piece and just have it all work. What a great thing. Now here's another one. Now this one we really are looking at a massive push in the direction that we saw very early on. Okay, with this, we're starting to take those facial features and really kind of push them back. Low contrast, low contrast. Then we get to something like this, and we just push it back so far that really, I mean, these values are so close to one another, right? There's almost no contrast there. It's very subtle. While on the hair, okay, it makes perfect sense. It's photorealistic almost, all right? Very interesting pattern work in the background. That just creates some interesting activity for us. We cast a shadow on it. That brings the figure forward, and it helps us from feeling that it's going to get too far, fall off the page to the left. But where is the color? Where's the color? You know, here's the color. Isn't that cool? Right there in the fingers. This is Dracula, right? Very nice. I love it. Look at all this beautiful work in here. And you get that same mirroring effect again. That mirroring effect where if I just were to isolate everything, I have a shape. Okay? That's light right there against everything else. If you just isolate that and stick it right there on that rectangle, it's really well positioned. It's not dead center anywhere. Gives you a little bit of tension. Okay, but you're also splitting it right here down the middle. Halvesies, right? Top half is the head, bottom half is all that lace, or all that folded fabric underneath for the collar. Really nicely done. Okay. So, but look at that. Try that out sometime. That's pretty tricky. That's what I was trying over here with this piece. So this was my little warm-up for today, based on all the things we're talking about here in Photoshop. Me just trying to push that face to where it has less and less contrast, add a lot of texture, think about shape, think about edges being soft, hard, right? This is where I was taking that, using a bunch of different brushes, so I have different mark making, right? All this stuff inspired by Mark English. Okay, another drawing, just quickly to look at this because I want you to see how here, resist the temptation to do this on this side, right? No flip-flop. If you're gonna mirror something, vary it, right? Throw this down here. Okay, none of that's by accident. None of that's by accident. And then all this surface texture for the even in a drawing like this, taking his eraser and just popping it in there and making some interesting things happen. So it's not just a solid value all the way through. It's really active, really nice. Okay, here's a close-up so you can see that a little better. Pretty cool. Now we're starting to get into some of the later stuff, and you can see how that earlier work inspired what you see here, right? Again, all of the same kind of elements in play, but really pushed to the max. Surface texture is abundant. Pattern work, right? In various places, right there, here. Elements of collage, right? Even if there weren't real collage elements in the earlier paintings, there was still a feeling of collage, of objects and things being placed on top of one another or blending into one another in interesting ways. Continuing the direction of a shape with a separate shape like this, right? So we go over into the shoulder here, but we also go all the way down through here, okay? And all that asymmetrical balance that's going on. Having this be gold, having this be black, and they're not symmetrical, right? This is all I need to say face. Fantastic. Pop of color right there, pop of color right there. There's our triangle. Okay, you remember that from the composition masterclasses I did. Wherever you're speaking in triangles, you're speaking my language, okay? Another one, same deal, right? Here we're really, really going to town with edges just disappearing and crumbling everywhere you look. But then at the same time being super sharp for this Pegasus, right? Just wherever. It's back and forth. It's making you go in to the picture and then come out. You're going back and forth, right? What's foreground, what's middle ground, what's background, that whole thing, and just kind of traveling forwards and backwards between the two. Really playing now with the wings with pattern, right? Just these plaids and crisscrossing shapes and so on. Still reads clearly from a distance. That's a Pegasus. Look at that. And then when you get up close on it, you're rewarded with all kinds of goodness. Same as before. All right, so let's take some of these now and let's try to incorporate them. So what would you do if you wanted to work in this kind of style? Well, first thing's to plan out your piece. Okay, so one of the things that's so good about Mark's work is design, right? So if I do feel like, okay, I want to have a figure, I want to go off center, okay? We have a face here, like this, right? And I want to think about, ways to make that, break up this space in an interesting way, right? So if I just bring this down and I think about, okay, so here's kind of where this all sits, right? What could I do maybe with the jawline coming down this way? Is there anything I want to do there? Do I want to elongate the neck? That was a trick we saw, right? Coming down this way. Carry that jaw as a shoulder right there. And then do we want to come across this way and down like so? Maybe like this. Maybe we want the hair to connect us this way. Okay, and then maybe we want to do this. See that? How we're doing this? Okay. Now here what I can do when I paint is just have that upper lid maybe be visible, but everything else will fall in the shadow. And maybe with the nose, the same kind of thing, we'll just have shadow shapes. Okay. Like that. Now we have this opportunity to break things apart a little further. I can pick this up right here. And maybe something will happen right back there. I don't know, maybe we could have, like, for example, the roof of a house. And maybe here at the halfway point we can come up just to break that up. Okay. That might work. And wrapping around the head there, we can have some just sort of cloud shape. Like this. See how we're thinking about all these elements that we saw? And then here, maybe it's just going to be like a vertical pattern to kind of draw us upwards. Okay. Maybe we need to have that interrupt like that. All right, so that could work. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure this out as I go, just trying to figure it out. Now we've seen also elements of, shape that make something a bit more interesting. So that might be a better decision there, just to balance out those straight edges. And maybe we want to come around here with those clouds, something like that. Maybe all of that will just kind of do this. Thinking about the thirds, right? We could have the base of the house be there. Maybe it's like a barn or something, so we can have a nice arch like that. That shape might work nicely against the hair. Okay. And we could have some tree or something there, like overlapping kind of a shape right here. Don't know. All right, I'll knock that back a little bit. And we're going to copy that. And we're going to plop it into a new canvas. Make it a little bigger. we go. And then, remember that thing about the surface being so active and interesting? So what I would do is, if I was going to play with brushes, is use a big brush. Okay. So go back into that spring 2023 brush set which just came out for all of you to play with, for example. And play with something like maybe the color push brush. And just put some something down that has a lot of nice active stuff in it, right? Using a neutral color here, it's fine. It's going to pick up some of that white, and it's also going to pick up the color in the foreground. So using the foreground and the background color simultaneously, as well as some color dynamics. Okay, there you go. And now just taking it to a crazy place here with that sky color. Just throw that in there. Bring that back over here. Okay. And then maybe I could reuse it for this area here where the dress is. Okay. That could be a nice way to tie that all together. So we get our 1, 2, 3 punch right there. You could do a little variation of it. Again, keeping things pretty neutral, but just like right here. Maybe that'll be a good solid shape. Alright. Now if you wanted to use a brush from the Impressionist brush set, you know, maybe I already want to play with some patterns. Of course could come later, but just to give you some ideas. In the Impressionist brush set, if I use the Shrew brush, okay, and size that down a little bit, and use a color that's similar to what's in here, and just paint over that with those dots. See that? And then go for some contrast. See that? We're already getting that sort of branded Mark English kind of pattern work right there in the sky. Right? And you see some evidence of that in the other drawing I did earlier, which I showed you guys right there. See, I was using the Impressionist brush right there, the Shrew brush. Okay, see all that pattern right there too. So coming back here, you can see how we could do this with brushes, right? How fun this is to start playing with this kind of stuff. Now for that face, you know, I want to have a bit more control for now, but I can do soft edge, hard edge, and all that good stuff. We can have some of that face just blend right into here. So go back to the brush I was using earlier. And that'll all just kind of be one thing, right? But here and there I can make some separations where I need to. Okay. And the way I would do that is just with subtle changes, okay? So for example, just go a little cooler right here, just push it a little cooler, okay, a little darker maybe. Size that brush down, just come in there and then lighten it up as I go, so I go a little more towards white, just along that edge, just break it up here and there. But some of it I can just let it be. If I hide that sketch, you'll see what I mean. See that? It's subtle. The values are pretty similar, but there's just enough of a sort of an edge there to break that up. Okay? So we'll pick this up next time and let's see what we can do with this, because I think you'll appreciate how much you can take what you see in the work that we're studying and then apply it right away to your own work. Like, think about all these things we went over. Don't be afraid to play with the usual color, use geometry, balance detailed and rendered areas, and all that good stuff. So that's Mark English, that's part 1. And I hope you have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Take care.